We're back. Let's see if we can remember how to do this. Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance, and as always, I hope you are as well. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. And if you're new to my channel, a very warm welcome to you. I've had a couple of new subscribers, so very warm welcome, and I hope you find what you're looking for. While it hasn't been too terribly long since I published a video, it has been kind of a minute since recording because of all the stuff that's going on this month, October, for me and my husband. And I pre-recorded quite a few, well, not quite a few. I pre-recorded 3 or 4 videos to publish while I was on our trip and while stuff is going crazy. So it's really great to be back in front of the camera and actually talking to you. We just got back from our trip to Norway, and I had thought about doing like vlogging, but it just never happened. You know, when you're traveling, and I just didn't have the bandwidth to, you know, record some stuff, but I did have some bookish stuff go on. I might, I don't know, put some pictures up, who knows, I don't know. Editing Heather is in kind of a different headspace than recording Heather. So, but I will tell you, they had their version of Little Free Libraries all over, well, I say all over the country. I think they say they have around 100. They used to be functioning telephone booths. For you youngsters out there, there used to be these boxes that kind of fit 1 or 2 people. And there was a phone that you can insert coins, which for you young people, no, I'm kidding. You can insert coins and make phone calls. It was basically a public landline. There were these cute red boxes, phone boxes, and I probably came across, I don't know, 9 or 10 of them. Oh, and they use them now as Little Free Libraries. Maybe I'll pop in a picture here or there as I talk about them, because I brought probably 4 physical books on my trip with me, and I left, I want to say 3 of those. Did I leave all 4? No, I left 3 in a Little Free Library, and I left the 4th one in the Chicago airport. No, I left the 4th one in the hotel in Oslo before we flew out. That's right. Yes, because you really wanted to know where I left my books. Anyways, maybe I'll pop in a picture or 2 of me at a couple of these phone booth Little Free Libraries. Anyways, the trip was great. It was quite an adventure. We had a great time. We saw some beautiful things. We did some beautiful things. We had quite a few hiccups in this trip. Mostly it had to do with we had rented a car, and unbeknownst to us, until we picked up the car, it was a fully electric car, which we had no experience with. And it led to some shenanigans where, I mean, it's not like you could just go into any gas station and swipe your credit card and charge it. You could only charge it by using specific apps. And of course, you can only use apps if you have internet service. So we had to mess with Wi-Fi, and it was kind of an ordeal, but we made it through. And anyways, it was a really great trip. But that's not why you came here. You came here for the books, and I am here to talk to you about the books I read in September. I usually do a mid-month wrap-up. I didn't have time to do that this month, so I'm talking about all the books I read in September. There are 10 of them. You know, fortunately, usually I have about, I don't know, 3 or 4 more books that I read per month, but because of the trip and everything else that's going on, I didn't read as much, but that kind of works out, because if I had 13, 14 books to talk about, this video might be longer than I want it to be. It's already going to be longer than my usual wrap-ups, but who cares? We're talking about the books, right? What else do I have to say? I hope everybody has had a good few weeks since I've been gone. Oh, I posted my 500 subscriber celebration where I was baking and answering the questions that you guys asked. So I posted that while I was on my trip, and I got a lot of comments on that, and it was really great to know that you guys enjoyed that video. It was fun to make. It was an adventure to make, but it was fun. And anyways, thank you all for your input and the questions and participating in that. And thank you so much. Anyways, let's get to the books, shall we? Okay, so I read 10 books in September. Yeah, the books were darker. My hair is darker. My heart is as dark as it normally is. Let's start with the stats. I read 10 books, like I said. I read 4 women authors, 1 author, person of color. I read 7 physical books, and I read 3 audiobooks. I won't go into the genres. I'll just talk about the genres as I talk about each of the books. And I won't specify how many different star ratings I have. I will say that my lowest star rating for the month of September was a 2.5 star. And my highest was a 5 star. I did have a 5-star read this month. No DNFs, so that's good news. And yeah, so let's get started. So the first book I read in September, I started the spooky months with a bang, and I read If It Bleeds by Stephen King. This is a collection of 4 novellas. I'm a huge fan of Stephen King. I read this particular one this particular month because as I've said in multiple videos, I am doing the Read Your Bookshelf challenge that Chantel over at Chantel Reads All Day has going. It's a year-long challenge. Each month has a different prompt. September's prompt was to read a collection. So perfect opportunity to read this one. I mean, I love Stephen King. Reading his books, reading his stories, it's kind of like a feeling of home for me is in terms of reading. I love his writing style. It feels like you're having a conversation and you're sitting across a table, we're having coffee, and he's telling you a story, and I love it. So this was no exception. The first story was my favorite, and it was Mr. Harrigan's Phone. So funny when this happens. This has happened multiple times where I finished this book and not maybe 2-3 days later, I see an ad on YouTube for a trailer that they've made. I believe Netflix has made a movie for Mr. Harrigan's Phone, and I'm super excited about it. That was my favorite short story in this one. It's basically about this young kid who is dealing with some stuff, and he goes and he starts working for this eccentric old guy who lives up the road, becomes friends with him, and the old guy doesn't really believe in the newest technology, but the young kid what was his name? The kid gives him a phone. A new iPhone, and at first, Mr. Harrigan balks at it and is like, no, but then in true technology fashion, he gets addicted to using it. Mr. Harrigan ultimately dies, and the kid finds a way to put the phone in Mr. Harrigan's coffin with him, and he ends up getting buried with the phone. And a short while later, the kid's phone rings, and it's Mr. Harrigan's phone. And it goes from there, and it was sufficiently spooky and satisfying, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to watch the movie. The other 3 stories were okay. I mean, they're good enough. One's called The Life of Chuck, that was kind of weird. I would say that was my least favorite of the stories. And then the other one was Rat, which was a decent story. That's about a guy a very familiar story, I think, for Stephen King, about a guy who's a writer, and he's written lots of short stories, but he's never written a novel, and he ends up going up to his father's cabin to try to write a novel, and things go terribly downhill, as they do in Stephen King stories. And then, of course, the title story, If It Bleeds, follows Holly, who is a character in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. And she also shows up in The Outsider. And she's a fantastic character, and I loved reading about her again. And I just loved reading this story. I loved the trilogy, the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. It was great. Yeah, this follows Holly on a little nightmare of her own. And it was fun to read. So yes, I gave this 4 stars. I did make a note. It says go to page 382 and talk about that. And it says let out a breath. So I Yes, I have to talk about this. I've talked previously about the whole let out a breath I didn't know I was holding line that's in so many books, and so many people just are so annoyed by it. So I couldn't help but talk about this. There's a paragraph in here that I have to share with you that's hilarious, and this is what makes just Stephen King so much fun sometimes. Drew let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Now this is in the rat story, and this is the story about a writer. And Drew is the writer. So Drew let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. And in parentheses, it says, a hoary suspense novel cliche that turned out to be true. Anyways, it's one of the things that I absolutely love about Stephen King. He has this way of kind of, winking at the reader and, finger guns, like gotcha and haha, and just kind of holds your hand as you're reading the story. And Stephen King, I love you. I gave this 4 stars. The next book I read was Apples Never Fall by Liane Moriarty. I love Liane Moriarty. I haven't read one of hers in a while. This one became available on audio, so I did listen to this. I enjoyed it. This follows a family in Australia, as typically her stories do. And it's a sports family. The mother and the father were very successful tennis stars, and all 4 of the children all were successful as younger kids in tennis. Yes, it's the Delaney family, and the father is Stan and the mother is Joy, and the 4 children, Troy, Brooke, Logan, and Amy. And they're all, of course, very different people. It's multiple perspective. It's also dual timeline. It follows what happens when the mother, Joy, she disappears. And the police are looking at Stan. And then what complicates matters is that there's a young woman who, a year prior to Joy's disappearance, shows up at their doorstep needing help. And Stan and Joy take her in, and she ends up staying for 2 months, much to the confusion of the 4 kids. Basically, this is a family saga, a story of revenge, a mystery. Obviously, we find, to find out what happened to Joy. It's a story about how our parents shape us as individuals, and it's a story about how misunderstandings can have catastrophic results. And sometimes that's kind of frustrating as a reader. If you had just said something, you could have avoided this whole mess. But that's kind of a smaller part of the story. I would have enjoyed this so much more if it was about 200 pages shorter. I enjoyed getting to know the different personalities of the 4 siblings. Joy annoyed the crap out of me most of the time. It was a really good story. It was just drawn out too long. It was too long. I'll still read her books. I think there's maybe 3 left in her backlist that I haven't read yet, maybe 4. Most of the time, I really love her stuff. None of her books have reached the standard for me that The Husband's Secret did. That was my first Liane Moriarty. It's my standing favorite Liane Moriarty, followed closely by Big Little Lies. But yeah, I'll continue to read her stuff. And I love listening to her books. They're always narrated by someone with an Australian accent. And I love listening to that. It's just delightful. And I love listening about kind of, Australian culture and the surroundings of Australia. So that was fun. I gave Apples Never Fall 3.5 stars. It could have been a 4.5, but it was just too long. Oh my gosh, speaking of too long, the next book I read, let me heft this up, was Imaginary Friend by Chbosky. This had potential to be 5 stars. Super unique story, well told. Again, 200 pages, too long. Just too freaking long. So I really wanted to love this. It started off just great. It started off with a bang. I couldn't put it down. You're immediately immersed in the story. It's from the point of view of 7-year-old Christopher. He deals with some bullying at school, mostly to do with the fact that he's dyslexic. He doesn't understand. He's smart, but he doesn't understand why he can't read as well as the other people, as the other kids, and he has a hard time at school. His mother, who has had a string of bad relationships, was it a string? I don't know if it was a string. She is running away from her most recent relationship, which was an abusive relationship, and she was in this relationship following the suicide of Christopher's father. So anyways, they're on the run. They settle into this small town, and she's struggling to make ends meet. She's living out of a motel. Meanwhile, one night, Christopher goes into the woods and meets a mysterious stranger who leads him into the woods deeper, and one thing leads to another, and Christopher doesn't come out of the woods for, I want to say, 6 days. And when he does come out of the woods, he's a different kid. Kind of the same, but different. His dyslexia goes away. He becomes a successful student, and things kind of turn around for him. He aces his math test, and his mother uses, I don't know, the correct answers on the math test and plays the lottery and wins. And so she's able to buy a house, and things are looking up. But this stranger continues to call to Christopher. The story goes from there, and things happen. And this is your tale of good versus evil. There's obviously some paranormal stuff, some supernatural stuff, some religious qualities to some of the stuff. And yeah, like I said, it had potential to be a 5-star book, really, really unique story. But it could have been 200 pages shorter. It just dragged on in the middle, I would guess. I think the first 200 pages and the last 200 pages were really, really good. The middle was like, oh my God. What else can I say about the characters? The characters are really well fleshed out. Specifically the mom, Christopher's mom, Kate, really, really great fictional mom. I really enjoyed the times where she was spotlighted in the story, which I feel weren't enough. If you don't mind the length, I mean, it was sufficiently creepy. All the stuff that happens in the woods and his imaginary friend, the hissing lady, very, very creepy. And actually there were times where I was sufficiently terrified. So if you're looking for a good scary story you don't mind getting immersed in long books like this, I recommend it, absolutely. But I gave this one 3.5 stars. The next book I picked up on a whim at the library. It just kind of matched what I wanted to read in September. And I always like to read at least one graphic novel a month. And that is Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. This is actually a graphic collection. I want to say there's 5 short graphic stories. So the artwork is beautiful and creepy. I mean, colorful and just stark. I think it gets the point across, but the problem is I didn't understand the point with the stories. Maybe I'm the wrong audience for this. I feel like this would have been really scary for, I don't know, maybe middle grade. But then again, the stories didn't make sense to me. And I'd like to be able to say that they were too simple, but it wasn't that. They didn't make sense to me. I don't know. I felt like it was geared towards a younger audience. Like I said, I really appreciated the art. It's really beautiful and creepy. I mean, just creepy. But yeah, the stories, I just didn't get them. I don't think they were scary. I mean, the stories themselves, the artwork was scary, but the story I just didn't find scary. Yeah, this was the low rated one for me. I gave this one 2.5 stars. Wah, wah. The next book I read for the month of September was Fight Night by Miriam Toews. This was a delight. I absolutely loved this book. This was a story told from the point of view of a 9-year-old girl, which seems to be an ongoing theme this month. Stories told from the point of view of children. This one worked really well for me. So 9-year-old Swiv is living in Toronto with her very pregnant mother. What is her mother's name? Mushi. Anyways, Mushi's in her 3rd trimester. She's an actor and she is raising Swiv on her own, but she's also taking care of her Mushi's mother, Elvira, Swiv's grandmother, and they're all living together. Swiv's dad is in the wind. Swiv is freaking hilarious. She is a smartass and she's super smart. So Mushi is kind of preoccupied with being in her 3rd trimester, being a single mom. She is dealing with her sister's suicide. She's rehearsing for a play, which is, you know, where she earns her money. Elvira is kind of taking care of Swiv. Swiv has been suspended from school for fighting. And so in order to kind of pass the time, Elvira has kind of assigned Swiv to write a letter to her absentee father about life. And in turn, Swiv has assigned Elvira, her grandmother, to write a letter to Swiv's unborn brother or sister. Basically, this is a story about multi-generational women living together, their relationships, how do they get along, and surviving the absurdity of life. This is laugh out loud funny, and at the same time, it is not in your throat, heartbreaking. I highly recommend this book. I highly recommend listening to it. Swiv's voice was just fantastic. The narrator did a great job of just Swiv's snarkiness. There's this one scene, just to give you an idea of Swiv's personality. She assigned the song Fever for when her mom calls her, which, if you know the song Fever, and she talks about how, oh, let me just read you the quote. I'd made Fever mom's ringtone because the song was about getting the flu from being too close to someone. I thought it was a good choice because she holds me tight and kisses me all the time, and she's always blowing her nose on me, and it makes me sick and gives me fever. But now I wasn't sure it was the right ringtone after all. I didn't want to have a sexy ringtone for mom on my telephone. Just stuff like that. Hilarious. And I absolutely recommend this book. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read in September, which was also on my TBR, yay, success, I read Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I enjoyed this book. This is a super popular, spooky month book. And it basically it takes place in the 1950s in Mexico. Noemi is a young, wealthy, debutante girl who is kind of living the life of Riley. She goes to parties. Her dad gives her whatever she wants. I think she's a good person, but she has kind of the superficial quality of a young woman who hasn't had to work a day in her life. But one day her father decides to send her as kind of an ambassador to the family to see what's going on with Noemi's cousin, who is newly married to a guy who is mysterious, and he has taken her to this house far away, and nobody hears from her really again. And so Noemi goes and stays with this family, her cousin's new family, and nothing's quite right. The house is dank and dark and not very warm and welcoming, and the family is kind of the same way. Her cousin is sickly and is not quite herself. And then Noemi starts, as she's spending more time in the house, Noemi is starting to have weird dreams, and she's sleepwalking and waking up in different parts of the house, and she's seeing things in the house that just aren't right, and it kind of goes from there. Now, there's a supernatural quality to the story, but I didn't find, that's not what I found scary about the story. I found the people scary in the story. The people were creepy, and you feel claustrophobic when you're in a room with them, and you feel like you want to leave but can't when you are reading about these family members. And I thought that was very well done. And so, yeah, as far as the house kind of being the creepy villain of the story, meh, it was all right. I mean, that part was okay. I felt it was very well written, very atmospheric for sure. Yeah, the creepiness, it was all in the people, all in the characters. There was kind of a suspension of disbelief that you kind of have as the story kind of unfolds. But that's kind of what I was looking for, so that was okay. Not as great as I was hoping it would be. I gave this one 3 stars. The next book I read in the month of September was The Guardians by John Grisham. I read a book a few months ago, which I absolutely loved, called The Confession. This one kind of has the same theme, and this is what I call it, a legal, yeah, I guess it is a legal thriller. This one follows Cullen Post, who is an attorney / minister, preacher. I can't ever tell the folks of the clergy apart. But he's ordained. He works for the Guardian Ministries. Not only does he work for them, I believe he founded the organization. And the Guardian Ministries is an innocent project who goes around the South helping wrongfully convicted folks. This particular story case that he's on in this story is Quincy, I believe his name is Quincy, who has been wrongfully convicted of murdering an attorney. And so Cullen is on his case, and he realized that Quincy has been framed, but not just any frame. He's been framed by very powerful people, and things start happening. Once Cullen starts helping him and starts digging into the old case, stuff starts going terribly wrong because there are super powerful people who do not want Quincy exonerated. So this is a page turner. It is very suspenseful. The thing that I think John Grisham does really, really well is his characters. His characters, they're usually from the South. They're usually very, very colorful. They've got that true Southern vocabulary. The way they use words are just a joy to read. I absolutely love this book. I gave this book 5 stars. It's my favorite of the month. I'm on like a John Grisham kick. This is the second 5-star John Grisham book that I have read in a row. Yeah, it deals with the death penalty a little bit. It deals with the United States justice system, which is terribly flawed. And it'll frustrate you at times, but there is hope in this book, and it just really kind of gives you everything that you look for in a legal thriller. Yeah, highly, highly recommend. 5 stars, all the stars. Absolutely loved it. The next book I read in the month of September was The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. I read this physical book, but I ended up leaving it in one of the cool free libraries in Norway. The former telephone booth free library in Norway. I think I left out the one in Oslo. This one, I love Grady Hendrix. I have read most of his books. I want to say I only have one left on his backlist that I haven't read. And it might not even be, I think it's his nonfiction book that I haven't read. And then he's got a new one coming out. This one, super popular on Booktube. This follows, what is her name? This follows Lynette, and she is a final girl. And as you probably already know, a final girl is basically someone who has been involved in some kind of terribly violent situation where everybody dies except her. Lynette she's a final girl. She survived a horrific event, and her entire life is completely affected by it. She is an agoraphobe. She only leaves her apartment to do the absolute necessary things to get food. And then she also goes to her Final Girls support group, which has, I want to say 5 other final girls who go to the support group, and the final girls plus their therapist. So she's getting through life, she's minding her own business, and then one day one of the final girls doesn't show up for a meeting, which is absolutely unheard of, and she knows something has gone wrong. And so the story goes from there, and basically it seems clear that somebody is aware of these final girls because I guess this group is super, super secret. Nobody else really knows about it outside the therapist and the 6 girls. Someone wants to pick them off one by one. If you like slashers, I think you'd really like this one. It's a decent story. Again, with the suspension of belief, it really needs to be on high with this one. And I didn't mind that so much. I mean, you kind of know going in. I mean, it's kind of an homage to slasher films and slasher stories. That's not why I read this book. I read this book because of the author. I really like Grady Hendrix, and he doesn't disappoint, I don't think. It just wasn't my favorite of his. I don't think it was my least favorite, though. I would say it ties with Horror Store, although I don't know. I feel like I liked Horror Store more now than I did when I immediately finished it. Isn't that weird how books do that? But anyways, the 5 final girls, they all have their individual personalities and you get to know them, and that was kind of fun. And there's some action scenes that were kind of, they were page turners. There is some violence in this book, of course. And I think I figured out who the bad guy was. And I think that might be by design. I think you were intended to figure it out. But I don't think that is the crux of the story. So I don't think that's that doesn't ruin it. It didn't ruin it for me. It almost seemed obvious. I hope I didn't give too much away. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of an action thriller slasher story. And if that's your jam, then by all means, give it a go. If you're a Grady Hendrix fan, also give it a go. I gave this one 3.5 stars. The next book I read for the month of September was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. This friggin' book. I know there's a few of you who have been waiting because I've mentioned this in like books that I want to read and books that I intend to read, and I've mentioned this particular book multiple times, and so there's been a couple of you who are like, I can't wait to hear what you think of this book, and I hope I don't disappoint you. This book kind of pissed me off. So this follows a girl. Is she named in the book? I don't think she's named in the book, but it's from her perspective, and she has a boyfriend named Jake. She is not happy with the relationship, but she kind of goes back and forth. And so she's thinking of ending things. Her boyfriend, Jake, if I haven't mentioned, they decide to go on this little road trip to visit Jake's parents. And most of the book takes place in the car. And weird stuff happens. The woman is, like I said, you're in her head where she's kind of going back and forth about Jake. Sometimes he is this wonderful guy that she enjoys being with, and sometimes not so much. And so I'm not going to spoil this book. I like being led astray by stories. I like being taken down a mysterious path. I don't like being tricked. But I will say that this trick was clever, and I felt like it served a really good purpose as far as talking about the topic that it talks about. And I can't really say what that topic is without spoiling things. Most of the book, I was like, what in the actual F is going on? But it kept me reading. There was a point where I did figure out what the heck was going on. But I think I figured out where it was intended that the reader is supposed to figure it out. And it lends to the creepiness of the story and the freakiness of what's going on. What else can I say without spoiling? It feels very claustrophobic at times, especially we're in the car. There are times where the woman makes choices that you're like, what are you doing? But you figure out later why those choices were made. So I wouldn't say I enjoyed reading this book. It is not an enjoyment. It's well written. You want to know what happens next. You are intrigued, but enjoyment is not a word I would use for this book. I'm glad I read it. People keep saying don't bother with the movie, but my curiosity, as always, will get the best of me, and I will watch the movie. I will lose 2 hours that I will never get back, but I just have to see how they did this. I have to watch. So I will be watching the movie. Maybe I'll talk about it in my next video. I don't know. Should you read the book? Do you like being tricked? Do you like clever writing? Do you like to be kind of in that state of what's happening? Then read the book. I gave it, what did I give it? I gave it 3 stars. And I can't remember if I mentioned it. I also left this one, I believe I left this book in one of the phone booth libraries in Stavanger, I think, pretty sure. What was the other book that I left there? I left Final Girl there, and I left I'm Thinking of Ending Things there. No, I brought, you know what? I brought The Only Good Indians? What is it called? Gosh darn it. Yeah, The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I actually brought that with me on the trip, and I knew I wasn't going to get to it, and I have the hardback, and I knew I wasn't going to get to it, and I just didn't want to lug it around in my suitcase anymore, so I left that book also in one of the free library phone booths. I'll put a picture of that too. I think I can't remember which town, but I'll read that one eventually. Just I'll probably end up getting it from the library, obviously, since I left the book in Norway. And finally, the last book that I read in the month of September was Descent by Tim Johnston. This book was almost a DNF, and then it ended up being, I really, really liked this book. Oh my gosh, where do I get started on this book? I think this is marketed as a thriller. I would say the first 50 pages and the last 100 pages are like thriller suspense, but most of it is a family drama. So basically you have a family of 4, mom, dad, younger son, who's I believe 16 when the story opens, and older daughter who is 18, I feel like. I think they're 3 years apart, 15 and 18. And the older daughter, Caitlin, is a track star, and she's on the way, I think it's her last summer before she goes off to college on a track running scholarship. And they go on this family trip to Colorado, and one morning they get up, and Caitlin and her brother, Jake, Caitlin and her younger brother, Sean, get up one early morning to go. Caitlin's going on a run, and Sean's going to follow her on his bike. Only one of them come out of the woods from this run. And Caitlin is abducted. It's not a spoiler. And Sean is very badly injured, but he makes it out of the woods, and it's a mystery what happens or who has taken Caitlin. Sean is badly injured. The mother and father, their marriage is already kind of on thin ice when this happens. They seem to be on track to getting better, but when this happens, they just kind of fall apart. And the mother ends up going back to their home in Wisconsin, dealing with stuff, while the father basically stays and he wants to find his daughter. He ends up living on this ranch in like the ranch house of the ranch owner, Emmett, who's this old man. Emmett, he's got 2 sons. One is the sheriff of the county and who has jurisdiction of this missing girl case. And his other son is kind of a ne'er-do-well, Billy, who kind of comes back and kind of hones in, trying to reclaim his stake on Emmett's ranch. And the father can't stand him and tries to protect Emmett. And and then Sean, the brother, he kind of goes on his journey. He's dealing with a lot of guilt about what's happened. So it's multiple perspective of each of these characters. It starts very slow. I'm going to be honest with you. It starts very, very slow, and you really kind of got to get into it. And once you realize what has happened to Caitlin, and you do figure out what's happened to Caitlin early on, and it goes to her perspective multiple times and what is going on with her, and then Sean's perspective, and he goes on this kind of road trip, and stuff happens with him, and he gets involved in some troubling adventures. And ultimately, like I said, this is a family saga, and you read about what happens to people when terrible, tragic events happen to a family and how it shapes them, how it affects the decisions they make in their lives. And it's fascinating, and the characters are really, really well fleshed out. And this is about how you know, human beings are multifaceted. All of us are multifaceted. None of us are truly evil. None of us are truly good. You know, good people do bad things. Bad people do good things. This was such a great story. I absolutely love this book. I highly recommend it. Just be aware that it starts off very slow, but then you just kind of get into it, and I love the story. What else can I say about this story? Anyways, I gave this one 4 stars. Yeah, this came in, I think, in a close second as to my favorite of the month. So there you have it. Those are all the books I read in the month of September. It is really good to be back. I've missed you all, and I hope you all are having a good reading fall. Thank you for your patience, because I know it has been there's been kind of a lull from when I published a video. And thank you for your patience with this video, because I know it's probably going to be a little bit longer than my normal videos. Do you guys like longer videos? Do you like it when I do mid-month and split them up and make them a little bit shorter and a little bit, you know, easier to get through? Do you guys have a preference, or are you just here for the books like I am? If you're still watching at this point, please consider giving that like button a boop and maybe a subscribe. That would be wonderful. I really enjoyed making this video. It's so good to be back. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.